The Edge of the Void wing is the final wing in Aberrus The Shadowed Crucible raid. It is home to Scalecommander Sarkareth. Very quickly going to describe how this guide is set up. The video is split into chapters for each phase. You can find them in the description. The first chapter will describe the phase mechanics, the second chapter describes each of the important abilities, and the third chapter will be role-specific duties. Sarkareth. This is a 3-phase fight that is the most mechanically intensive of all the Aberrus bosses. It requires the constant juggle of a debuff, ad management, and good positioning. Ideally, the raid should stay stacked up near the boss unless avoiding abilities. There are key differences between LFR and normal in phase 1 and 3, which will be highlighted. Try to save Bloodlust for phase 3. Phase 1. Phase 1 consists of juggling debuffs to avoid a lethal attack. Sarkareth will apply a debuff, Oppressing Howl, to the entire raid. Each raid member must remove this debuff before Sarkareth uses Glittering Surge. Oppressing Howl can only be removed by getting hit with one of Sarkareth's abilities. Each of Sarkareth's abilities changes depending on if you have the Oppressing Howl debuff or not. For instance, Mass Disintegrate targets an individual and deals a certain amount of damage. However, if that player has an Oppressing Howl debuff, then it will also apply a dot and a slow movement debuff. The idea is to get hit by Mass Disintegrate or Searing Breath once in order to clear your Oppressing Howl debuff. Once it's clear, you should avoid attacks whenever possible. Ideally, the raid should remain stacked on the boss unless an ability requires movement. This phase lasts until either Sarkareth reaches 60% HP or he uses Glittering Surge twice. The main difference between LFR and normal is that on normal, every time a player removes the Oppressing Howl debuff, it will cause raid-wide damage. This means that normal players need to rotate, half the raid clears their debuff from Searing Breath and another half from Mass Disintegrate. Phase 1 abilities. Oppressing Howl. Sarkareth inflicts this debuff on all raid members. Players with this debuff will suffer additional damage when hit by one of Sarkareth's abilities. Scorching Bomb. Sarkareth places bombs near players. Any player within 10 yards will suffer damage every second. After 12 seconds, the bomb will explode. Any players hit with this bomb will have a fire dot that lasts for 5 seconds. Burning Ground. When a Scorching Bomb explodes, it leaves a patch on the ground that inflicts damage every second while standing in it. Mass Disintegrate. Sarkareth will create a blue image of himself that marks several players with an arrow. After 6 seconds, energy shoots from those images to those players. This deals damage to the marked player and any players caught between them and the image. Disintegrated. If a player gets hit with Mass Disintegrate while they have the Oppressing Howl debuff, then they will be hit with a debuff that reduces movement speed by 25% and deals damage every 5 seconds. Searing Breath. Sarkareth breathes fire in a frontal cone. He does this 3 times back to back. This deals damage and inflicts a dot that lasts for 12 seconds. Seared. If a player gets hit with Searing Breath while they have the Oppressing Howl debuff, then they will be hit with a dot that deals damage every second. Glittering Surge. This deals raid-wide damage for 8 seconds. Dazzled. Any player hit with Glittering Surge while they have the Oppressing Howl debuff will be stunned and take increased damage. This is lethal. Burning Claws. This is the Tank Buster. It inflicts physical damage and applies a fire dot that lasts for 27 seconds. When the dot expires, it inflicts 10% of the total damage done to the rest of the raid. Normal difficulty only. Echoing Howl. This inflicts raid damage every time the Oppressing Howl debuff is cleared. Role-specific duties. Tanks. Taunt swap after each Burning Claws. Pop a physical reduction cooldown when Burning Claws is cast. Utilize a magic reduction cooldown to reduce the damage you take from the fire dot. Healers. Expect constant damage as players must get hit by attacks to clear debuffs. Use magic reduction cooldown on the tank to help minimize the amount of damage the raid will suffer upon expiration. Glittering Surge will deal heavy raid-wide damage. DPS. Clear your Oppressing Howl debuff before Glittering Surge. Use defensive cooldowns when clearing your debuff to reduce damage taken. Stack up on the boss as much as possible. Run away from the raid if targeted by Mass Disintegrate. On normal difficulty, spread out debuff clears as the raid damage can wipe the raid. Phase 2. Sarkareth will start this phase by hovering above the arena. He will begin channeling Oblivion, which will stack on each player to 10 stacks. At 10 stacks, the raid will be thrown into the Void. Once in the Void, players have 25 seconds to gather 3 Mind Fragments in order to return to the battle with Sarkareth, or they are killed. While in the Void, players can also grab Astral Flares. These add a stacking buff that lasts 25 seconds and increases players' haste by 5% and movement speed by 10%. Once players return from the Void, the Oblivion stacks are reset and the real Phase 2 begins. Any player hit by Sarkareth's Void abilities will gain the Oblivion debuff. It will stack for each subsequent hit. This is crucial as players will need to purposely obtain Oblivion stacks in order to deal with Void Bombs. Sarkareth will spawn Void Bombs, which will detonate and deal massive raid-wide damage. Players need to run into these bombs to grab them. Once in possession, they need to obtain 10 stacks of Oblivion and return to the Void before it detonates. Sarkareth will also summon ads after his breath attack, which needs to be dealt with as he will continuously buff them over time. Phase 2 abilities. Oblivion. This is a stackable debuff that deals damage every second. Reaching 10 stacks sends the player to the Void. Inside the Void, players have 25 seconds to collect all 3 Mind Fragments or they die. Players can also collect Astral Flares, which will add a stacking buff, increasing haste and movement speed. Void Bomb. Sarkareth randomly throws bombs onto the arena. These explode after 20 seconds, dealing massive ray damage. Carry these into the void so they can explode. Abyssal Breath. Sarkareth will jump up and fly to a different location, breathing fire along the path. Glimmers. These are the adds left behind during the Abyssal Breath attack. Interrupt their casts. Desolate Blossom. Sarkareth marks areas on the map that will spawn an orb with a ring. This deals damage and absorbs all healing done to any player standing within it. Void Claws. This is the Tank Buster. This deals massive physical damage and leaves behind a dot that deals shadow damage over 18 seconds. When this debuff expires, it deals damage to any player standing within the ring around the tank. Role specific duties. Tanks. Taunt swap after each Void Claws. Pop a physical reduction cooldown when Void Claws is cast. Run away from the raid as the Void Claws debuff is expiring. Healers. Expect constant damage as players must get hit by attacks. Watch for the healing absorbs from the Desolate Blossoms. DPS. Use defensive cooldowns when purposely getting hit by abilities. Stack up on the boss as much as possible. Kill and interrupt the adds ASAP. Take Void Bombs to the Void to detonate. Phase 3. This is a DPS race, as Sarkareth will grow stronger the longer this fight drags on. The Oblivion and Void mechanics still apply to this phase. LFR difficulties, Sarkareth will use Cosmic Ascension, in which he will mark a big area on the map. After a brief second, he will crash to the center of that area, dealing damage, knocking any players back that are inside the ring. This attack will spawn more Glimmer adds, and will call down meteors from the sky. These meteors will smash into the arena, leaving behind a pillar. These are crucial, as players must stand in the beams protruding from the pillars in order to avoid Sarkareth's Scoring Eternity attack. Each time Sarkareth uses Cosmic Ascension, he will buff himself, dealing 10% increased damage. This stacks. Throughout this phase, swirlies will be marked on the ground. These will inflict damage and add 5 stacks of Oblivion to anyone standing in the circle upon impact. On normal difficulty, the Void Bombs are still present and must be handled the same as Phase 2. Unlike LFR, the pillars do not disappear on their own. Sarkareth will target one player with Embrace of Nothingness, which creates a ring around that player. Other players must help soak this attack, and it must be moved onto pillars to destroy them. Finally, Sarkareth will conjure portals on the outside of the arena. Each portal will target one player with a blue arrow. These players need to move away from the raid as it shoots a beam towards their location. Phase 3 abilities. Oblivion. This is a stackable debuff that deals damage every second. Reaching 10 stacks sends the player to the void. Inside the void, players have 25 seconds to collect all 3 mind fragments or they die. Players can also collect astral flares, which will add a stacking buff, increasing haste and movement speed. Cosmic Ascension. Sarkareth marks a location with a large ring. He then crashes into the center, dealing damage and knocking players back. This summon adds and causes meteors to fall from the sky. Astral Formation. These are the meteors that fall. They leave behind a pillar that deals damage to any close players. Glimmers. These are the adds that are left behind, interrupt their casts. Motes of Oblivion. These constantly rain down during the fight, marked by swirlies. They deal damage and add 5 stacks of Oblivion to any player hit. Scoring Eternity. This is a massive attack that is lethal. Players must stand in the beams of light that are radiating from the pillars. Void Slash. This is the Tank Buster. This is a frontal cone attack that deals massive physical damage and leaves behind a dot that deals shadow damage over 21 seconds. When this debuff expires, it deals damage to any player standing within the ring around the tank. Normal abilities. Void Bomb. Sarkareth randomly throws bombs onto the area. These explode after 20 seconds, dealing massive raid damage. Carry these into the void so they can explode. Hurtling Barrage. Portals are created on the outside of the arena. Each portal marks a player with a blue arrow that will deal damage to any players caught in that path. Embrace of Nothingness. One player is targeted with a soak mechanic. Players should group and use the circle to destroy extra pillars for space. Role specific duties. Tanks. Taunt swap after each Void Slash. Keep the boss facing away from the raid. Pop a physical reduction cooldown when Void Slash is cast. Run away from the raid as the Void Slash debuff is expiring. Healers. Expect constant damage as players must get hit by attacks. Damage ramps the longer this phase lasts. DPS. Use defensive cooldowns when purposely getting hit by abilities. Stack up on the boss as much as possible, but stay behind him. Kill and interrupt adds ASAP. Watch your feet. On normal, take Void Bombs to the void to detonate. Run away from the raid if targeted by Hurtling Barrage. Use Embrace of Nothingness to remove pillars and help soak. Congratulations, you just defeated the final boss of Aberrus. Show some support by pressing that like button. If you liked the cheat sheet at the start of this video, you can find a link to that in the pinned comment and description down below. Check out my channel for guides on the rest of the raid. Subscribe if you enjoy WoW content. I have guides, tips and tricks, podcasts, and more. Super thanks channel memberships and Patreon perks are also available if you are interested in further supporting the channel. I'll see you in the next one.